We are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Darian Talks UTSA. We got a special guest, um, Mr. Greg Luca. Here, you guys probably have seen him, San Antonio Express News, covering UTSA for years. And one of the I have Apple News Plus, so I get to be beyond the paywall, so I get to read everything. So
Nice.
anyway, yeah, thanks a lot to all you've done, in terms of the coverage and you guys not being afraid of asking those tough questions. I always talk to, or I tell JJ that every time. So welcome to the show and happy to have you on.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me. I know we tried to do this earlier and it didn't connect, but I've been really impressed by the way you've kind of stepped up your coverage this year and the little community you've created here as well. It's been fun to watch all the reactions come through every week. So I'm a fan. Glad to be here.
Yeah, man, awesome. So chat, make sure you guys fill up the comment section as much as you can. I already see we have some coming in here. And Mike, you were beat today. My man Frank got you today. He was the first one to comment. So yeah, folks are getting it in early because Greg was going to be on. But make sure you guys smash a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. But yeah, I'm not gonna do the full hour today, guys. I'm just gonna go about 30 minutes. So get your questions in early so we can get them over to Greg and we can kind of talk about some of these. But Greg, one of the things, it's been very difficult, right, to sort of I guess frame this season, considering what UTSA has generally been under Traylor and sort of this sort of difficult season that has come with some, I would say, I don't know if underperforming is the right word, but I think considering the expectations coming into the season based on what we've done the last 3 years, I think a lot of folks are underwhelmed. So, how would you frame the way this season has gone, and like with you just being around the program and is following every game and is at the practices and talking to Coach Traylor, how would you frame the way this season has been so far?
Yeah, college football is so funny because of the way the mood can swing from week to week. And so I think we're talking about this right after the biggest win of the season and one of the biggest wins of any recent season. And so I think the mood is a little up right now, but it is important to remember the preseason expectations. And we came into this year talking about a spot in the college football playoff and winning the conference and things like that. And it wasn't all the media is doing. I mean, they were having those conversations and they were telling us that was the way that they thought this season might be able to go if everything fell right. So to lose to Texas State the way that they lost, obviously there was a lot of outrage around that from the fan base who takes that rivalry really seriously. And then, I mean, you think about a game against Rice where that's a team they've beaten by like 30 points the last 3 years and have not been competitive with. And this isn't some juggernaut Rice team. They fired their coach, and to lose that game was a shocker. And then obviously the way things happened at Tulsa to blow a lead like that is something that is going to stick with people for a long time. So the other thing is the way it happened, like the penalties being such an issue and some of the mistakes that felt kind of undisciplined or like it was the same errors week after week and things that made a lot of people kind of shift the focus to the coaching. So I think there's certainly a reason for optimism down the stretch. It seems like they could put together a run to a bowl game here and still salvage another winning season if they win that. So, that would be nice in the grand scheme of things, but certainly I think there's no other way to feel than disappointed in the big picture.
Yeah, and I want to see if you got this same sentiment, right? I was thinking about this last week, coming off the game against Memphis, and one of the things that I've sort of said all since I started covering in this way on the live chat, doing things live, a lot of folks were really big on the recruiting class and like, oh, we got this guy, there's this many stars, this guy's a 4-star, 3-star, and my thing, I'm not one to. I don't really care that much about the stars, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just me. For me, I'm more focused on, are we addressing positions and holes that are important for, our upcoming season, right? That's the thing that I'm most concerned about. But I do recognize that we do have a lot of talent, and some of the stars would suggest that we have a lot of talent. One of the things that I've sort of had, one of my main takeaways of the season has been, I can't think of a team talent-wise, just pure talent-wise, that we weren't either even with or most likely better than outside of UT. Even Texas State, don't get me wrong, Texas State is a talented team. They have some really good players. They got a really good quarterback. They got some guys some skill position guys. They got a couple guys on defense that are nice. But if I went talent for talent, I'm not seeing us getting blown away from a talent perspective. It's been, in my opinion, us not being able to put the chess pieces in the right places for us to, get victories. To that, you say what?
Well, so coming into the season, there was obviously a lot of people who thought that this was the most talented and deepest roster UTSA had ever had. And I understand why that was probably the perspective, because we've seen some of the transfers that Traylor's brought in here have been huge hits and have had a lot of success right away. And to this point, for this year's class, we haven't seen that same level of impact from the transfers that have come in here. Some of them have been useful starters and productive players, but there hasn't been anybody who's sort of emerged or exceeded expectations in any huge way. And earlier in the season, I was kind of just thinking about even the guys who are returners, how many of them developed in really meaningful ways or took huge steps forward from last season. So I think that started to look better as the year has gone on. But generally, I do think that you have a good point that the talent is probably better than a lot of the teams that they played, especially a team like a Rice and a Tulsa that they ended up losing to. And if you need any proof, just look at the game against Memphis, who we spent a lot of time talking about how much their roster cost and how much talent those guys had. And UTSA was able to really control that game in a lot of ways. I don't know how much you get into the advanced stats. The post-game win expectancy was really low for UTSA. It didn't seem like they won a lot of the little critical errors or the little critical areas that usually add up to winning the ball game. But you watch it on the field and they were up by 2 or 3 scores until the very end. So I do think that showed that they have the talent to play with anybody, certainly in this league.
Right. That's exactly how I've been feeling about it. And I'm just like, what is it? What's holding the guys back? I want to ask you about Coach Traylor a little bit. You've spent a lot of time with him, interviewing him and things after games and things like that. How do you think he's handling this situation this year? How do you feel about that? There's been some mixed feelings about some of his comments, some of his answers to certain questions and things like that. Some folks are really, they love it. They're gung-ho about it. Some folks are a little, get a little worried about some of his cryptic messages and, some of his candid responses. What's sort of the way you think he's been handling this situation this year?
Yeah, I think one thing that's important to note is that he has never had a losing season at any level as a head coach. I mean, you go back through his whole tenure at Gilmer and he never lost there. And obviously, even the first year at UTSA, they were, whatever it was, 7-5, I think was the end record. And so it's very unprecedented for him to be in this kind of situation. He experienced it as an assistant at some of these other places that he was at before UTSA, but never to actually be the guy in the head chair who has to answer for it. And so I think it's been kind of a learning process for him in that sense. One thing I want to clear up initially is I think a lot of times after the game, the fans end up focused on NIL as an excuse, but he has never made NIL an excuse this year in any of these post games or anything like that. That hasn't come up. So he was very intentional about when they're winning, let me make the point of trying to fundraise and ask for this. And when we're losing, I'm not going to use it as an excuse. Now, that being said, there have been times where, despite pretty clear discipline issues or things that people are going to point to as coaching errors, he stressed patience. This is a young roster and a young offense, and it was certainly a change of tone from coming into the year when that came up some, but they still expected that they'd be at a higher level than this. And he's admitted that he thought it would come together quicker and they thought it would be farther along than it ended up being. And, he's pointed to injuries at a time when certainly later in the year that has been completely validated with the amount of guys that they lost, but I think it was becoming an excuse before it was a really great excuse. And so that part I didn't love sometimes, but generally I think he's stepped up and tried to take accountability for it and said, everything that goes wrong is on me. And it's cliche in a lot of ways, but not everybody says that. And it's an important note to actually make publicly. And so I think he's done that part of it all right.
Yeah, I do too. I actually don't have an issue with most of the comments that he says. I actually like that he can fly off the handle a bit, because sometimes he will give you a candid response to what's actually on his mind. And I mean, I don't have to tell you this from just interviewing folks and, doing your normal job, but some guys are very media trained and it's very hard to get an inch out of them. And I think it's kind of cool that Traylor sometimes will give you, this is how I'm feeling. This is the reason why you asked me a question. I'm going to answer it, to my best ability. That was one of the things. That's one of the things that I appreciate about him. You touched on NIL there for a second, and I like to ask. I like to get from you. There's a lot of discussion about NIL in general. Obviously, the overarching thing is we don't have enough money to pay players. We didn't have enough money to go out and get a quarterback. We didn't have enough money to do all this stuff, right? To retain some of our best guys. What's sort of your reaction to some of the discourse around it? Because you get one story from, Coach Traylor has his story. Lisa Campos has an angle to this, and then there's this fan sentiment that you know more needs to be done on the marketing side and this sort of thing. As you sort of like grasp all of it and look at it objectively, like what's sort of your reaction to the NIL environment UTSA is in currently?
Yeah, it's a really tough question because there's just not a ton of transparency about what's going on everywhere.
Yeah.
But from what I've been able to gather, UTSA does pretty well relative to the rest of the league. It's just that the teams that you talk about are the Memphis and the USF and
right.
those, and even like a Tulane. Those teams obviously are a step ahead, and it's not hard to understand why when they have a greater history and sort of maybe just the demographics and the alumni base and things like that are better suited to being able to have huge fundraising total from the people who have graduated there, where UTSA is still a pretty young alumni base. And remember, we had this conversation around the time of the student fees. Like the students who come through UTSA are among the highest like percentage of Pell Grant receiving for financial aid that's need-based among any like FBS school. So you understand why a lot of the grads aren't immediately able to shell out huge money to support the football program. So in that sense, it's still a work in progress. Now, that being said, it is a big city, and there is enough here that if they continue to work it, that they can continue to have some success. We saw like what April Ansira does is huge, and what Bob Wills at the City Fans 2-0 group does, like the way he took care of Frank Harris and got him to stick around for the extra year was pretty big. And so I think that it's not as bad as people say, but the real issue is what happens next with the start of the revenue sharing. And that's a whole different conversation, because that is no longer community driven. I mean, the community helps and the fundraising is always going to be important, but that's a question of how much the university is willing to commit to support it and how much extra money they have to spare for those student athlete revenue sharing payments. And we've seen the athletics budget at UTSA has expanded hugely, where it's over 50 million now. Yeah. And I think when I started here, it was like in the high 20s or low 30s. And so they have taken steps to invest more and more in athletics, but this is just another thing where I think the going number is about 2 or 3 million it would take basically to build a really strong G5 roster, because you're talking about, your Ohio States and your Oregons of the world can spend up to about 20, but at this level, 2 or 3 would get it done. So can they fundraise about 1 from NIL, where I think this year they're probably in like 500 to 600,000 range, and can they get 2 from the university? And that would put them in a good spot. But that can they get 2 from the university is a question we're going to have to ask a lot over the next few months.
Interesting. I want to get to some of the questions that we got in the chat. I think I'll go to Mike here. And sorry, guys, if you want me to guarantee your question, you can leave a super chat. You're not obligated to do that, but I am going to pick the question that I see that I think is going to fuel the conversation as much as possible. So if I skip over your questions, I'm sorry. But Mike asked a question here. He said, thoughts on Rocco leaving for Tulane? Is this a calculated move by them to try to get an advantage for next year's matchup?
That's funny. Yeah, I don't know. I hadn't seen this because Rocco blocked me on Twitter for some reason. Somebody would have to ask him what I did. But yeah, I hadn't heard that until just this chat came through. So that is interesting. I hope for him. He seems like an awesome guy, and he's really was one of the smarter guys we got to interview. It was big here because he could speak Spanish, so the Spanish stations always love talking to him. But yeah, I don't know how much of the offense he's going to remember or be able to translate over there in a way that could help him. That's an interesting question. You hear that in the pros all the time, but I think they self-scout enough that they'll work around it.
Yeah, they'll be fine. We had a couple guys that came from teams back when I was there, and like not much more so than anything, the guys will give you a better and a more detailed profile on particular players that they would like to exploit. But in terms of like, the offense is going to do this or that, it's probably not going to be hugely valuable, to be completely honest, Mike. But good question. I do like this other question from Mike. He says, if the runners went out, do changes still need to be made, in your opinion, at the OC position or any other position on the staff?
Yeah, the offensive coordinator conversation has been a really fascinating one to follow all year, because I tend to be really hesitant to be critical of that position, because you just don't know what kind of stuff they repped in practice and how well it worked and why it didn't translate to the game, whether it was just one execution issue that led to it breaking down or if it was just a bad idea. And so I've hesitated with that a little bit, but I do think that they're not necessarily married to any of the staff that they have now. It's obviously turned over a little bit with the guys that they've had leaving that spot. So it remains to be seen, but we've certainly seen, like in this Memphis game, I thought the offensive play calling was really strong, put the guys in pretty good positions. And we've seen, actually, interestingly, if you look at the average depth of target for Owen McCown in the last 3 weeks, it's been the 3 highest numbers of the season. So he's going downfield a lot more. And I asked Coach Traylor about that this week, and he said it was basically because the offensive line has started to hold up better. So I think as that unit is coming together a little bit more, and as Owen McCown's getting more comfortable, and even David Amador's return was huge. We saw, I mean, he played like 20 snaps, and he was the Wildcat quarterback, and he threw a throw and a trick play, and he lined up at halfback, and he was in the slot. And I think we'll find out as the year goes on that basically a lot of what they were able to do on offense was probably tied up in his versatility. And so not having him forced a lot of changes. And I don't need to rehash the injury situation there, the amount of guys they've lost at wide receiver and on the offensive line. So I do think Berth's hands have been tied a little bit, but I don't want to say for certain that he's done an awesome job and that he'll be back. I just think it's probably still an evaluation.
Yeah, I think my main issue with Berth has been and I'm sure you know this. When offensive coordinators start a game, they have a script of about 15 to 20 plays. Depending on how good of a coordinator they are, they might can go to 15 to 17 or something like that, unless they get knocked off script because we end up down by 14 points or something unexpectedly or something like that, right? What I noticed with Berth is he's very good on scripts. Very, very good on scripts. I will give him that. But my annoyance is whenever the defense makes a second half adjustment, or typically if you look at when our offense starts to break down, it's halfway through the second quarter or after second half when an adjustment is made. So whenever we go off script, that's when the play call, in my opinion, gets a bit shaky because it's like, okay, well, whenever we do have to go off script, we have to get to our bread and butter. And I feel like we've been having trouble doing that. Now, I will say in recent games, it's been better. I think one of the adjustments he made that was really nice to see against Memphis was he moved the pocket a lot. McCown was rolling out left, right, and that also alleviates some of the pressures on the offensive line because now the defensive lines have to adjust to a rollout blocking scheme, and that's going to create some hesitancies through that. So anyway, that's been sort of my overall perspective and where the root of my issues with Berth has been. I will give him credit. He stopped the in my opinion, bonehead trick plays that in weird times. He has not brought that with him this year. I think he might have did like one that I was really upset with, but I'll take that. However many games we are during the season, through the season now. But yeah, his ability to not adjust to when a defense is adjusted to him has gotten him into some trouble, in my opinion. Although I do think in Memphis, he called a good game from start to finish.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And one note is I have a feeling when those trick plays come in, I don't know this for sure, but I imagine the head guy has a lot to do with that too. I don't know how often Berth's dialing those up on his own, but I think you raise a great point about the adjustments because that's something that I think people around the program are starting to feel a little bit is like the offense is great when they get the exact defense they're expecting. And when they start to see different stuff, they don't always have the plan B ready to go right away. And I think part of that is when UTSA becomes a team that people are targeting and that they have on their radar, you are more likely to see teams break tendencies against you or come up with some kind of special game script to try to slow down what you've shown you can do. And so then the emphasis on that becomes even more heightened. So I would say that, that's a very valid point.
Yeah. We got a question for you from Kermit. Shout out to Kermit. I hadn't seen Kermit in a while. Thanks for joining us, Kermit, today. He says, does Owen McCown hit the portal after this season? He has high hopes for our QB recruit, Max Gerlich, to develop under him. What are your thoughts on that one?
I don't know if you stuck around after the stream and listened to Traylor's interview on the field, but he kind of said the quiet part out loud when he said that they have a couple years with Owen after this. And I think it's a very interesting dynamic when you think about Traylor's relationship with the McCown family and how far that goes back and how tight they are. And the fact that if Owen gets offered $250,000, he doesn't need it as much as a lot of other players. So I think UTSA is understanding and might have even played into the competition to figure out who was going to be the quarterback. Is that Owen is the guy that they can count on for the future, that he's going to be here for the next 2 seasons. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. I even kind of speculated on it just because how many times can you have your receivers drop passes or how many hits are you willing to take? But especially as the offense is starting to play better and understanding all those other factors, I really wouldn't be worried about it.
Yeah, I think Owen I will give him credit that he has gotten better progressively, especially after the bye week. I think his performances has been, every single game he's gotten better. Um, Even the game a couple games ago where he threw 2 interceptions. I think we won that game. I think it was FAU. Um, he had 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. I even thought he played awesome that game. Yeah, outside of the 2 interceptions, I thought for the most part he delivered. We had a lot of drop passes that game that I think contributed to some of the issues and things like that. But I think he's coming along. I am personally still not sold on, is that the quarterback that's going to be able to put up banners? Has he shown enough dynamism that like has convinced me solely? I don't know. He could. There's still time in the season, but and I'm liking what I've been seeing over the last couple of weeks, last 3 weeks or so. But yeah, he's getting better. I'll give it to him. Max says, "Do you think that the attendance will go up in the next couple of games, especially with the big win at home and fans realizing the importance of the Alamo Dome home field advantage?"
Well, it was crazy because against Memphis, it was one of the smallest crowds they've had since COVID or pre-COVID, really, and they were still making a disruptive amount of noise that Memphis had. I think like 5 false starts. Like they was still really impactful. And they always say that because the dome, whatever the crowd is, it sounds like it's double that. But to answer the question, unfortunately, I would say no, mostly because it's the Friday night kickoffs. Like that's
exactly
kind of a killer. Whether it conflicts with high school or not, I don't remember where they are in the high school calendar if we're getting into playoff season, but it's just not something that's in people's normal rhythm. It kind of gimps your tailgating ability and all that stuff. So I think that if they hover around this Memphis number, they should be happy with that.
Yeah, I agree. It screwed me up because I made some plans and I was like, "Oh shit, these games are on Friday."
right.
And I was like, "Yeah, I can't make it to Friday. I still have work. I'm not going to be able to do it."
For the traveling fans from Houston or Austin or wherever, that's really problematic.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Matt says, "What's up, Greg? What's the outlook on Robert Henry and his injury? Is he expected to finish the season, or are going to be down, or are we going to be down another starter?"
Yeah, I guess he broke his thumb on a fielding a kickoff in warmups. And this is why I would never have my starters play special teams, but that's just me. I know that that's a big thing for Traylor and his staff. They love doing that stuff. So that's neither here nor there. But I think the fact that he played in the game tells you that with a couple weeks to be able to splint it or brace it or however they need to, that he'll probably be able to go. I wouldn't anticipate that he's not going to be out there. I think you'll still see him.
Okay, we got a phone from David here. He says, "Did we ever find out what GTS 12 meant?"
No, they have not told us that. I think, the 12 probably tells you all you need to know, how many teams are in the playoff. So
yeah.
So that, I think there's probably a reason you haven't seen that as much, given the current landscape of things.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We got another from Eric here. He says, "Greg, what is the likelihood of the OC returning next year? Or they think, okay, we covered this one. We covered the OC discussion before."
But I would just say, I do think that's to his point. I do think there's still a lot of times early in the year, I thought it was an execution issue. And I'm sure you being a former player, I'm sure you watch the game and see it a lot differently than someone like I do. But even I was picking up on, there's 2 guys to block 2 guys and they block the same guy and the other guy makes the tackle, and it's stuff like that. So I think when that happens on a play, it's just hard to blame the coordinator. So I do, but then it's like, well, that's still the coach's fault, right? So you end up in the same place. But yeah, I would say a lot of times it's hard to be too critical of the play calling without knowing all the other moving parts.
Yeah, the coordinator discussion is very, very difficult because you're right. The execution, especially earlier in the season, offensive line, I got to tell you, dude, it was really bad. I was watching, especially the first few games. I probably have watched every game at least 2 or 3 times over just to sort of like get my notes and stuff for the show. And early on, the play, the issues on the plays were just really, 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 really bad. From some of our offensive line, especially the run block. It's gotten better, but like it was very, very unfortunate before.
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns about the run blocking even going forward. I mean, they don't get to the second level. They don't create a lot of push up front. They don't move. They don't reset the line of scrimmage. You're just kind of hoping that they disrupt the person across from them and that the running back can make a play, because they're not really making it easy on them more often than not.
Yeah, and I think some of that is a recruiting issue. Not that we are recruiting the wrong guys, but you got to think about we have sort of this RPO style offense that you're going to need sort of linemen that are fleet of foot, that are going to be a little bit more finesse in term because they need to pass block a little bit more than they get downhill. Run block, we're not getting up under the center and running at all anymore like we used to. So like just naturally you're going to get less aggressive guards and things like that. So I don't
Well,
know. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say it's jumping ahead a little bit, but you do have a question on here about the O-line health and the injury situation there. And I think, that's a big part of that too, because they don't have the guys that they thought they'd be able to count on up front to create some of those lanes. And so to the question of why, I have a lot of thoughts on that, actually. I mean, they point to the strength staff and the nutrition staff, and I would agree that that's hugely important. And once we have a little more time, I want to look at what they have versus what everybody else has, and how does UTSA have to add or readdress that staff to get up to the level that is the standard in the league. But if your argument is that guys are getting hurt because they're overweight, that's a personal accountability issue. And I think 6 strength coaches in a building full of coaches and assistants is enough to tell a guy, hey, don't be 340 pounds, and do weigh-ins and make sure they get to the level they need to get to play healthy. So, I mean, I understand that the need for those resources is real and that it exists, but I do think that there's got to be a level of them handling that internally if that's the real issue, because again, like, also you just get unlucky. Injuries are just going to kind of happen sometimes. And I don't think that there's necessarily a root cause of it, but I don't blame them for trying to solve it, because obviously it's been a huge issue and you may as well, learn whatever you can learn.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Nutrition and stuff nutrition and conditioning overall is starting to be more of a topic over the last few weeks, and it's obviously related to some of the injury situations. But it brings an interesting sort of I don't know, it brings an interesting bull to the ring, I would say, because it's not something you typically hear your head coach harp on. And is that him calling for like a more expansive staff, or are there really issues? Because if they're like, to me, like, for example, we had weight targets, right? So like I remember I was on weight gainers for 4 years because I was too small. Like whenever I first got into UTSA, just to let everybody know, I was 5'9" and I walked in there at $175. The first thing they said was, let's get this guy a protein shake and protein bars every day. So they literally called us to the weight room, and I walked back to my dorm with protein bars and shakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was on that for my entire time when I was there, until I finally, my senior year, got to the weight that they wanted me to get to. And I remember they told me, they said, hey, we want you to play anywhere from 190 to 195. But they said in the offseason, get up to 200, I think 202 or something like that was my number, because obviously in camp, you're going to lose so much weight. So you'll lose 10 pounds of just weight because camp is 2 days, it's hot, and those sort of things. So I bring that up to say, like, if they're having nutrition and like conditioning issues because guys are like individually not doing what they're supposed to do, and I'm sure they have more folks, more resources now than we had back when we were there, and they were really on our butts about it. That to me sort of highlights a little bit of some character flaws, a little bit, if those are issues that they're having.
Well, yeah, because that's a great point. I mean, you did it without those resources, and wouldn't every FCS Division II, Division III high school program just be getting run over by injuries if it was impossible without all those resources? So I think certainly they deserve that stuff, and they should strive to add those positions to the strength staff and nutritionally. But if you have an issue with the players and their weight and their ability to play at the weight that they're at, that's got to be handled either way.
Yep. Shout out to JJ. JJ's in the chat. He left a super chat. Shout out to JJ. He says, for those that watch all the interviews, what does Greg feel like he is good, hard, fair interview question versus what fans want to ask? How much do you pay attention to the online fan perspective?
I pay really close attention to it. I try to get, like I was just saying at the top, I try to see what you guys have going on here, and I try to get in. JJ posts all the interviews, and I always read the comments to see what people might want to know or how they're reacting to what Coach Traylor is saying. And to a fault, when I should be writing, I'm scrolling my Twitter timeline after the game to see what people are angry about in the moment. And so I think it's really important to have a pulse of that, because in a lot of ways, I do feel like I am the voice of what people want to know, because I have the access to ask that questions where they don't. And And there's just not a lot of us. It's me and JJ who are there every day asking questions. And other than that, you might get a guy with a TV camera who might jump in every once in a while, or somebody else who could show up occasionally. But generally, it's on us to sort of drive that narrative, which, to his point, I think makes it harder because we have to protect our personal relationships and keep those positive more than if you're at UT and there's 30 guys in the room. You can ask something snippy and they're not going to know any difference because you're just kind of another guy in the crowd. And so I think it's just important to be very calculated about how you ask those things, or at least be able to envision a good answer. Sometimes fans are just mad about stuff and you're saying, ask about this thing that I'm mad about. But it's like, what's the actual question that ends with a question mark? Like, what are you actually trying to get out of them? So I think it's all really interesting. But yeah, put your comments wherever of stuff that you think that we should be pressing them about. I hope especially some of these Mondays after these tough losses, I think we've pressed him pretty hard and
y'all have
and gotten some decent reviews on the way we've approached it. So if there's anything we're missing, I'm still open to go back to it, but I think we're trying our best.
Yeah, no, I think you guys do a great job. Like I said, when JJ was on here, I was talking about it too. Like, you guys do a really good job of asking the questions that we want to. I think even Coach Traylor on one of them, he was like, "You guys are being rough on us today." That was one of the. I think one of the games Owen didn't play very well early in the year. Coach Traylor was kind of like, "Oh wow," but yeah, another thing too. I think I want to kind of touch on what you said about like protecting those relationships. And people have sort of asked me this a lot because I'm close with people around the program. Some folks still around the program, and like I talk to you guys, like I talk to JJ and things like that. But folks sometimes would ask me like, "Hey, like, are you worried about the blowback because you said this on Twitter or you said this on your show?" And I tell people like, so I went to school to do your job. That's what I wanted to do. I interned with UTSA Director Communications with Kyle and Brian and them back in the day when I was there. I wanted to do this, but one of the things for me is I'm super opinionated, and it's very hard for me to keep my mouth closed. And if I'm super opinionated, I am probably not going to do a great job at what you do. So I sort of have to use a different forum, and I'm not going to have those same relationships. So I'm not going to be as close, and I'm going to lose insight, right, and access to some of those folks. But it's sort of like that's why the whole media atmosphere is like interesting, because you got some guys who are super close. They're going to protect some certain things. You got some guys who are sort of on the outside who are going to come at it from a different angle. So I always encourage everybody to check out your content, check out JJ's content, check out mine when they get a chance, and kind of go, and the Alamo Audible guys as well.
The other thing I want to point out is that there's some stuff that people want asked that we're just not going to get a good answer. Like, so there was, I think, I don't know if it was even like last season or 2 years ago, but one of the commenters very frequently wanted to know like why they don't have enough check down options. And it feels like they're running deep routes and getting sacked. And it's like, he's not going to draw up the schematics for us. Like the other coaches are going to see that. So there's certain things that people want to know that I try to find a good way to get something that's on that topic, but it might just be something that's kind of unapproachable. And then we just don't waste our time.
Yeah, I want to get your thoughts. I know we have a question from Shadow Wing. I'm sorry, Shadow Wing, but I'm going to ask my own question because we have to wrap here pretty soon. Shout out to UTSA Shadow Wing, by the way. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the upcoming final 3 games, right? These are super important because now with UTSA winning the game against Memphis, now bowl berth is, still possible. I think a lot of folks, I don't think based on the way the season has gone, I don't think we can pencil in any games, but I think a lot of folks are penciling in the Temple game. But North Texas and Army are going to be a little bit more tricky. What are your thoughts on the last 3 games, and how do you anticipate UTSA fares over those 3?
Yeah, I think based on what we've seen under Traylor going 27-3 at home in his tenure, it is hard to expect that they're going to lose a home game at this point. And North Texas has had a good season. There's a question here about how UTSA matches up with their air raid offense. And, UTSA has given up near the worst in the nation in like 50 plus passes, 40 plus passes. They're right near the bottom of that with some of the big plays that they've allowed this year. But even considering the kind of matchup disadvantage that might present, it's just hard to imagine that they're not going to find a way to get it done in the Alamodome at this point, because North Texas has been good, but they haven't been outstanding, like some
Right.
team that UTSA wouldn't be able to play. They haven't been as good as Memphis, so if UTSA can win that game, then they can beat North Texas, and Temple's one of the bottom teams in the league. So you would expect that would be an easy win, especially at home. The way this season has gone, is it possible they could have a dud and that could become an interesting game? Maybe. But generally, I think they're going to get those two just because they're in the Alamo Dome. And so that puts you right at bowl eligibility. And then the game at Army to close the season, which is going to be extremely tough, becomes kind of a freebie. Like if you can get that one, that's incredible. But if not, you're still in the same spot.
Could you imagine us going in and shocking Army and knocking them off their perch, considering how they've done that to us?
Yeah, it's interesting because UTSA has had some troubles slowing down that type of offense in recent years, and against Army in particular, they've not had the best results. But there's been times where run defense this year has looked like the strength of the team. So who knows if this is the right group to go in there and get it done? And it's got to be like facing a knuckleball pitcher or something, right? Like after you've seen the guy enough times and have you seen that system and how that works, you have to get better at playing against it. I think that's one of the things that they trick people with, is just it's so unorthodox.
Yeah, I really hope so. I think the Army game is going to be tough. I am cautiously optimistic as well against North Texas because we are good at home, and I feel good about that. I feel good about our chances there, but I think the North Texas game is almost, for bowl berth purposes, a must-win because the Army game is a crapshoot, to say the least. Who knows what that game's? I mean, we could go in and blow the doors off of them. They could blow the doors off of us, or it could be a rock'em sock'em game that drags out to the end. But I'm gonna go ahead and wrap there, Greg. I really, really appreciate you joining the show today. Lots of good insights. Sorry, chat, we can go the whole hour, but I will definitely try to get Greg on and at the end of the season, when the season is over, just to sort of recap and look back at the season once it is over. But yeah, guys, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Greg, where can they find all of your work?
Yeah, find me on Twitter at Greg Luca, and that's where I'll be linking all my stuff. But of course, you can just go to expressnews.com and get everything there. I think probably people have had their fill of national election stuff by now, but there's a lot of local stuff that we're going to have better than anybody else. So if you want your updates on what's going on with your local government and everything else, and even as that pertains to developments with the Spurs and the Mission Stadium and all that stuff, we've been way out ahead of the pack on that. So there's plenty of good reasons to subscribe to Express News, and hopefully UTSA coverage is part of that. So please give us a look.
100%. Thanks a lot, Greg. Thanks a lot, everybody who tuned in today. We will catch you guys next week. Peace.
One thing, I'll hang out in the chat if it's okay. I don't know if it's going to kick me out, but I can answer some of these questions here while we're still around.
It's probably going to kick you out, but what I typically do is I reroute folks to Twitter. So,
okay, yeah,
guys. Yes, guys, fill up Craig's inbox on Twitter with the questions that we did not get to today. And yeah, if you got any questions for me, feel free to tag me as well. I'll get to them all as well. But yeah, fill up Greg's Twitter, man. Let's do it.
Thanks, Darian.
All right. Thank you, Greg. I'll see you.